Dinner smells amazing, David said, setting his briefcase down with that familiar thunk against the hardwood floor. I dropped the wooden spoon. It clattered against the kitchen tiles, sending droplets of marinara sauce across the white cabinets like blood spatter. My knees buckled, and I gripped the counter's edge so hard my knuckles went white. "You're dead?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the bubbling pot of pasta. "The police called. They said you died at 9:40. David's smile faltered for just a moment. A flicker of something I couldn't name, before returning to its usual warmth. "Sarah, sweetheart, what are you talking about? I'm right here. My name is Sarah Chen, and I've been married to David Martinez for 8 years. We met in college during a late-night study session in the library. He was the business major who actually helped me through organic chemistry, and I was the pre-med student who showed him that not all science was boring. We were opposites in the best way. He was the extrovert who made friends with every barista, while I preferred the quiet corners of coffee shops with a good book. David worked as a financial advisor downtown, leaving every morning at 7:30 sharp with his travel mug of black coffee and a kiss on my forehead. I worked night shifts at Metro General Hospital as an ER nurse, which meant our schedules rarely aligned perfectly. But we made it work. Tuesday nights were our sacred time, homemade dinner, terrible reality TV, and his terrible jokes that somehow always made me laugh. This morning had been no different. He'd kissed me goodbye while I was still half asleep, mumbling something about picking up dry cleaning and being home by 8:30 for dinner. I'd pulled the covers over my head, caught another hour of sleep, then gotten up to prep for what should have been another ordinary Tuesday. The call came at 10:47 a.m. Officer Martinez, no relation, just a cruel cosmic joke spoke in that practiced, gentle tone they must teach at the academy. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm calling about your husband, David. There's been an accident. Head-on collision with a semi-truck on I." David's Honda Civic had been crushed beyond recognition. The officer said he wouldn't have suffered, that it happened too fast. They needed me to come identify the body. I'd screamed. Actually screamed, like in the movies, until my throat was raw and my neighbor, Miss Chen, again no relation, came running over with her spare key. She held me while I sobbed, called my supervisor to tell them I wouldn't be in, and drove me to the morgue. The body was mangled, but it was him. Same scar on his left hand from when he'd tried to fix our garbage disposal. Same wedding ring, the simple gold band we'd bought at a pawn shop because we were broke newlyweds. Same David. I'd spent the day in a fog, making phone calls I never thought I'd have to make. His mother in Phoenix, his brother in Seattle, my parents in San Francisco. Each conversation felt like ripping off a bandage over and over again. The worst part was calling his daughter Emma. She was only 6, from his first marriage to Rebecca, and she stayed with us every other weekend. David was the kind of father who never missed a school play, who knew all the names of her stuffed animals, who made pancakes shaped like her favorite Disney characters. "Is Daddy coming to my recital on Faye?" she'd asked when I called Rebecca's house, her voice bright with excitement. I couldn't do it. I couldn't tell this little girl that her father was gone, that he'd never see her tap dance to Singin' in the Rain, or help her practice her routine in our living room. I'd handed the phone to Rebecca, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Emma was the reason David worked so hard, saved every penny for her college fund, and wore himself thin trying to be the perfect father, despite only seeing her 4 days a month. She was his heart walking around outside his body, and now I had to figure out how to help her understand that her heart had stopped beating. The rest of the day passed in a surreal haze. I'd called the funeral home, started making arrangements I never thought I'd need to make at 30. David's boss, Mr. Peterson, had been surprisingly kind, offering to handle David's final paycheck and promising to write a recommendation letter for whatever I needed now. I'd wandered through our house like a ghost, touching his things, his coffee mug still in the sink, his reading glasses folded on the nightstand, his work shirts hanging in the closet. Everything smelled like his cologne, that woody scent that had become synonymous with home and safety. By late afternoon, I'd started cooking. It was muscle memory, really. Tuesday night meant spaghetti and meatballs, David's favorite. I'd been making the same recipe for years, the one his grandmother had taught me during our second year of marriage. My hands moved automatically, browning the ground beef, chopping onions and garlic, stirring the sauce. Maybe it was denial. Maybe it was the desperate need to do something normal in a world that had suddenly become unrecognizable. Or maybe deep down, Some part of me was still waiting for him to walk through that door at 8:30, just like he had every Tuesday for the past 8 years. The pasta was perfectly al dente when I heard his key in the lock. I'd been stirring the sauce when I heard it. The familiar jingle of his keys. The creak of the front door that we'd been meaning to fix for months. My heart stopped. Actually stopped. Like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed. "Sarah? I'm home." His voice carried from the entryway. Warm and familiar and impossible. I stood frozen at the stove. The wooden spoon trembling in my hand. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. I'd seen his body. I'd held his cold hand and kissed his forehead goodbye. I'd signed papers and made arrangements and called his family. But there he was, walking into the kitchen like nothing had happened, loosening his tie the way he always did. That same tired but happy smile on his face after a long day at the office. "How was your day?" he asked, moving toward me with arms outstretched for our usual greeting hug. I stumbled backward, my hip hitting the counter. "Don't touch me." The words came out sharper than I intended, and David's expression shifted to confusion. "Sarah, what's wrong? Are you okay?" "You died," I said again, my voice stronger this time. "I identified your body. I called your mother, your brother, Emma's school. I spent the day planning your funeral, David. You died in a car crash this morning at 9:47 a.m. David's face went pale. For a moment something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, fear, but then he laughed. A sound so normal and familiar that it made my chest ache. "Sarah, sweetheart. I think you had a nightmare. I'm fine. I'm right here." He gestured to himself, solid and real and breathing. "See? Not dead, very much alive. But I'd worked in emergency medicine for 5 years. I knew the difference between dreaming and reality, between trauma and truth. I'd seen enough impossible things to know that sometimes impossible things happened." "Prove it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Prove you're real." David's smile faltered completely this time. "What do you mean, prove it? I'm standing right here. Tell me about your day. Tell me about the meeting with the Johnson account. Tell me about the dry cleaning you were supposed to pick up." David opened his mouth, then closed it. His eyes darted around the kitchen, landing on anything but me. It was a normal day, you know. The usual office stuff. The usual office stuff. My voice rose. "David, you've been working on the Johnson account for 3 months. You had a presentation today. You were nervous about it. You practiced it in the mirror this morning while I was getting ready for bed." He shook his head. "Sarah? I think you're having some kind of breakdown. Maybe you should sit down." That's when I noticed it. The scar on his left hand. It was there but faded, like an old photograph left in the sun. The scar I'd kissed 1,000 times. The one he'd gotten trying to fix our garbage disposal 2 years ago. It was barely visible now. Just a thin white line that could have been a trick of the light. "You're not David," I said, the words falling from my lips like stones. "You look like him, you sound like him. But you're not him." Whatever was wearing my husband's face took a step back. "Sarah? You're scaring me. I'm your husband. I'm David Martinez. I work at Peterson and Associates. I love you. I love Emma. Emma's recital is on Friday," I interrupted. "What is she dancing to?" Silence. The thing that looked like David opened its mouth, but no words came out. "David knows every song on Emma's playlist. He's been helping her practice for weeks. He knows she's nervous about the turning sequence in the second verse. He knows she wants to wear her hair in a French braid like the older girl." Tears were streaming down my face now, but my voice stayed steady. "So tell me, what is she dancing to?" The David thing's face went blank. For a moment it looked confused, like it was trying to access a file that wasn't there. Then something shifted in its expression, something cold and foreign, that made my blood run cold. "I don't know," it said quietly. "I don't know, because I'm not him." The admission hung in the air between us like a physical thing. I felt my knees wobble, but I forced myself to stay standing. "What are you?" I whispered. "I'm what happens when someone dies with unfinished business," it said, and its voice was still David's voice, but empty now. Hollow. "I'm what happens when love doesn't want to let go." I sank into one of our kitchen chairs, my legs finally giving out. "I don't understand. Your husband died this morning," the thing said, and it was still wearing David's face, but the warmth was gone from its eyes. "But you kept cooking dinner. You kept waiting for him to come home. You kept believing he would walk through that door at 8:30, just like all. So I'm what your grief created. I'm what your love couldn't let go of. I'm a shadow of a man who should be at peace, but can't rest because you won't let him." The words hit me like a physical blow. I doubled over, gasping. "I didn't mean to." "You kept him here," the thing said. And now its voice was changing, becoming less David and more something else. "You kept cooking his favorite meal. You kept waiting for him to come home. You kept believing." Around us the kitchen began to shift. The warm yellow walls faded to gray. The smell of marinara sauce turned sour. The pasta water boiled over, hissing against the burner. "I have to go," I said, standing abruptly. "I have to let him go." The thing that had been David nodded slowly. "Yes, you do." I walked to the stove and turned off the burner. The sauce stopped bubbling. The pasta water settled. The kitchen grew quiet except for the soft tick of the clock on the wall. The clock that had stopped at 9:47 a.m. and somehow started again when this thing walked through my door. "I love him," I whispered. "I know," the thing said. And for a moment it sounded like David again. "That's why you have to let him go." I called Mrs. Chen first. She came over within 10 minutes, took one look at my face, and pulled me into her arms without asking questions. She stayed the night sleeping on my couch, making sure I ate something and took my sleeping pills. But sleep brought no peace. I dreamed of David, not the hollow thing that had stood in my kitchen, but the real David. He was sitting at our kitchen table, reading the newspaper like he did every Sunday morning, his hair messy from sleep, wearing that old Stanford t-shirt with the hole in the left shoulder that I'd threatened to throw away a dozen times. "You have to stop cooking for me," he said, without looking up from the sports section. "I'm not coming home for dinner anymore, Sarah." "I know," I said in the dream, and somehow I was 8 years old again, sitting across from him in footy pajamas. "But I don't know how to stop." He folded the paper and looked at me with eyes that were kind but tired. "Start cooking for yourself. Start living for yourself. I'll be okay." I woke up with tears on my face, and the smell of his cologne still clinging to my pillowcase. The next morning, I called Patricia Reeves, the grief counselor the hospital recommended. She fit me in for an emergency session, and didn't blink when I told her about the night before. She'd heard stranger things, she said. Grief could manifest in ways that seemed supernatural, but were really just the mind's way of processing trauma. I told her about the shadow with David's face, about the faded scar, about the empty eyes. She listened without judgment, and gave me tools for what she called healthy letting go. "Grief isn't linear," she said, leaning forward in her chair. "It doesn't follow a schedule. Sometimes it looks like bargaining with the universe. Sometimes it looks like cooking dinner for someone who isn't coming home. Did I really see him, or am I losing my mind? Does it matter?" she asked gently. "Either way, you experienced something that told you what you needed to hear, that David is gone, and that it's time to let him go." Over the following days, I began the slow work of dismantling a life built for two. I donated his clothes to the shelter downtown, keeping only that Stanford t-shirt and his favorite sweater. I called his friends, his colleagues, his distant relatives. I wrote his obituary, a task that felt like trying to capture the ocean in a teacup. David Martinez was a loving husband, devoted father and loyal friend. I wrote, he believed in Sunday morning pancakes, terrible dad jokes, and the power of a perfectly timed hug. He left us too soon, but his love remains. The words felt inadequate, but they were true. Emma's recital was on Friday. I almost didn't go. The thought of sitting in that auditorium, surrounded by intact families, felt impossible. But Rebecca called that morning. "Emma keeps asking if you're coming," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard. "She said her daddy told her you would be there." So I went, sitting in the back row with tissues in my purse, and David's favorite flower, a single white rose in my lap. She danced to Singin' in the Rain, in a blue sequined dress, her hair in a French braid that Rebecca had clearly struggled with. She was beautiful and graceful, and completely David's daughter in every way that mattered. But what broke me wasn't her performance. It was the way she searched the audience afterward, her eyes scanning the rows until they found mine. She smiled and waved, and I saw David's expression of pure joy reflected in her small face. After the show, I gave her the rose and told her it was from her daddy, who was watching from somewhere even better than the front row. "I know, Sarah," she said, looking up at me with David's eyes. "He told me in my dream last night. He said to tell you he's okay, and that you make the best spaghetti and meatballs in the world." She hugged me then, fierce and tight, and I realized that Emma wasn't just David's anchor. She was mine too. In her, his love continued. In her, he wasn't really gone. The funeral was harder than I expected. I'd planned it, paid for it, chosen the flowers and the music, but nothing prepared me for the finality of watching David's casket being lowered into the ground. Emma stood beside me, her small hand in mine, both of us wearing black dresses that felt like costumes for a play we never wanted to be in. "Is Daddy really in there?" she whispered as the first shovelful of dirt hit the wood. "His body is," I said, the words feeling strange and necessary. "But the part of him that loved us, that's somewhere else, somewhere safe." She nodded solemnly, then did something that surprised me. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, a drawing she'd made of the three of us having a picnic. She kissed it and tossed it into the grate. "So he won't be lonely," she said. In the weeks that followed, I learned to live in the spaces between grief and healing. Some days were good. I'd laugh at a patient's joke at the hospital, or find myself humming along to a song on the radio. Other days were so dark I could barely get out of bed, but I kept going, kept showing up, kept breathing. I started seeing Dr. Reeves twice a week. She taught me about continuing bonds, the idea that our relationships with the dead don't end, they just change form. She helped me understand that the thing I'd seen in my kitchen wasn't really David, but it wasn't entirely separate from him either. It was my love for him, made manifest in my moment of greatest need. "Love doesn't die," she told me during one session. "It just finds new ways to exist." I began to understand what she meant. David was in the way I remembered to water the plants he'd loved. He was in the way I still made his grandmother's marinara sauce, but now I made it for Emma when she visited. He was in the way I'd catch myself setting 2 coffee cups on the counter, then smile and put one back. 6 months later, I was cleaning out David's closet when I found the receipt. It was crumpled in the pocket of his work jacket, the dry cleaning he'd been supposed to pick up the day he died. Peterson and Associates shirts, ready for pickup Tuesday afternoon. He'd never made it to the dry cleaner. He'd never made it past the intersection of 5th and Main, where a semi-truck ran a red light and ended the life of a man who just wanted to come home to his wife and Tuesday night spaghetti. I sat on our bedroom floor, holding that receipt, and I cried. But this time it was different. This time, I wasn't crying for the man who couldn't come home. I was crying for the man who had loved me enough to try, even after death, to keep our Tuesday night tradition alive. The next Tuesday, I did something I'd never done before. I invited Emma for dinner. Not the formal kind of dinner Rebecca usually arranged, but a real Tuesday night dinner, complete with spaghetti and meatballs and terrible reality TV. "This is what Daddy and I used to do every Tuesday," I told her as we sat at the kitchen table, marinara sauce on our chins. "I know," she said, twirling pasta around her fork with the concentration of a surgeon. "He told me about it. He said it was his favorite part of the week." "What else did he tell you?" I asked, genuinely curious. "That you make funny faces when you're concentrating," she said, giggling, "and that you always burn the garlic bread, but pretend it's supposed to be that way." I laughed, a real laugh that came from somewhere deep in my chest. "He's not wrong about the garlic bread." Emma reached across the table and took my hand. "Sarah, are you going to be okay?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of everything we'd both lost. I looked at this brave little girl, who'd somehow become my anchor, and I realized that the answer was yes. "Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but someday." "Yeah, sweetheart," I said, squeezing her hand. "I think I am." That night, I made grilled cheese and tomato soup, my comfort food not hit. I ate it at the kitchen table, with a book propped open beside my plate, something I'd never done when David was alive, because he liked to talk during dinner. At 8:30 p.m., I looked at the front door, and felt nothing but quiet peace. David wasn't walking through it, and that was okay. He was wherever he was supposed to be, and I was learning to be where I was supposed to be too. But I wasn't alone. Emma had fallen asleep on the couch, her head on my shoulder, and I could feel David's love surrounding us both, not as a ghost or a shadow, but as something warm and eternal and real. The clock on the wall ticked steadily forward, marking time that belonged to the living, and I was grateful to be counted among them. All of us, even the ones who loved us from beyond the veil of death.